This is an ABC podcast.
These are interesting times we live in when one of Australia's most popular media stars is a maths teacher. Now, some people love maths for its elegance and its sublime perfection, but a lot of people don't like it, don't get it, and are not interested in even trying. So how do we explain the staggering popularity of Eddie Wu, who teaches maths at Cherrybrook Technology High School in Sydney? Eddie didn't even particularly like maths at school. He felt like he was asked to memorise a set of arbitrary rules to a game he didn't understand or have any desire to win. Eddie was going to be a history and English teacher, but then he was persuaded to change his mind, and he's glad he did. Then one day, Eddie decided to start recording his classes for the benefit of a student who was seriously ill. The videos were strangely compelling, and so kids at his high school started sharing them. And then students at other schools started watching. And then an international audience came flooding onto his YouTube channel, which of course is called WooTube. And now WooTube has nearly 700,000 subscribers. Eddie Wu has written several books for kids, and his most recent is Eddie Wu's Magical Maths. Hello, Eddie.
Richard, thanks for having me.
And you were in Uganda not so long ago to talk to some teachers. What brought you there?
My relationship with Uganda started when I was sitting beside an incredible woman at the University of Sydney. Her name is Annabelle Chauncey, and she and I are very similar in age, but we're not similar at all in what we've achieved in our lives, because as I'd met her 10 years prior, she had, because of some work volunteering at the UN, decided, finding herself in East Africa, that she could do something about the dire situation that so many young people find themselves in an area like that. She realized this education is the game changer for so many communities and families there. And so in a particularly rural area of Uganda, so it's about an hour and a half west of Kampala, the capital, she literally in the middle of the forest started up, it's now 3 schools, and by chance meeting her and sitting beside her at this award ceremony we were both at, we pretty quickly realized we were both on the same page, and she said, would you like to fly over and work with my teachers there? And I couldn't say no.
Come to Uganda. Well, and while you were there, kids, it's an English-speaking country mostly, although there are older African languages there too, is that right?
Uganda has its history as a British protectorate, which is why its formal education system, all of the curriculums are in English. However, the area that she started her schools in, it's like I said, a farmland area. Most of the people who live there are subsistence farmers, and so they're only speaking the local dialect, which is Luganda, as opposed to people in the capital who do speak English. And I think a lot of African nations share that. But that was part of the reason why I could be useful there, because I could speak the language of instruction.
So that's just it. What do you know? Did you know this already, that there are universal approaches to teaching? Because if you're teaching a kid in the middle of rural Uganda as opposed to big city Sydney, is it basically the same thing, or do you have to sort of change quite a bit in order to go to somewhere like that?
It's really interesting because I've always known every school that I've gone to, and now I've had the privilege of going all around Australia and a few other countries as well. Children are children. Their basic curiosity, their human needs for care, support, trustworthy adults in an environment that's stable, all these things
and
remain
to be entertained
as
well.
Right, and to have a teacher who brings energy and excitement to their lessons. These are things which have nothing to do with a particular culture. But at the same time, I remember getting closer and closer to flying over to Uganda and actually spending some time there and thinking, what have I got myself into? And, the second you get off the plane, the smell is different, all the signs are different, the language, everything. There was a moment where I was kind of terrified. You got those butterflies in the stomach, but I thought, no, I'm going to go for this. I'm here. And when you have that interaction with kids and you can make eye contact with them, pose them a question, make them think. That's when I realized, no, it's okay. Remember your training. Everything came back, and it was just like I was in any other school.
And did they have questions for you about who you were and where you were from and why you were there?
Well, I think there was initially, here's this person from Australia. And I think they have a picture in their mind of what an Australian looks like, and I was not it.
Right, it's a kangaroo in a fishing cap,
Exactly, that's right. You got the hat with the corks spinning around. Certainly they were expecting someone who was Caucasian, but the second I opened my mouth, I think I was nervous that I'd have to speak a bit slower. I'm the kind of person who talks very fast, especially when I get excited about something. But they said to me, and I was delighted by this, they said, actually, you're easier to understand than some of the other Australian people we work with. I thought, okay, I'm not sure why that is, but I'll take it. So it was a delight working there.
So when you're teaching English, when you're teaching maths, I should say, you say the key thing is to help kids and people develop an idea of mathematical fluency. What do you mean by mathematical fluency?
Fluency is a word I love. It's something we borrowed from linguistics, of course. And it's this whole idea that when you and I are having this conversation right now, because we're fluent in English, we don't really have to think hard about what does this word mean? What does this phrase mean? It's something that is so deeply woven into the way that we think. You know, it's the language that we think in, that I don't have to construct my sentence carefully. All I think about is what it is that I want to convey to you, the emotion that I want to convey, and what I want to emphasize. And in terms of mathematics, there are these building blocks that are the same. Times tables are something which you want to be fluent in so that you can then free up your mind to think critically and creatively to solve a problem.
So they often say maths is the language. So it's like being fluent in a language then, essentially, where you don't have to process every word of the sentence. It's just the intent and feeling and idea just comes out with this language without having to use your front of mind to process it. That's what you mean, yeah?
Absolutely. And I think it's the same way that a lot of people say, oh, I just never really understood mathematics. It's a little bit like saying, well, I never really understood Spanish. It's,
right.
Well, okay, if you're at a beginning level where you're still really just coming to terms with what these words mean, it's not the same as having a conversation with someone. Once you actually get a sense of that, or a musical instrument, being able to know where your fingers go, how to get that rhythm, once that foundation is there, that's when the creativity and imagination can flow.
And when you're trying to teach a kid who's fallen well behind in maths, where do you start? How do you figure out where to begin with that kid?
Well, that question of where to come back to really is the crucial question. All knowledge in mathematics is so interconnected. I think that's one of the best things about it. It's a bit like a good story that you're reading when you've got all these different characters and different arcs in the plot, and you think, where is this all going? And what makes a good story is at the climax. Everything, of course, the threads reconnect. Mathematics is a bit like that. Arithmetic, geometry, calculus, sometimes they look disparate. But when they reconnect, it's when there's some true beauty there. That's wonderful, but it's also challenging. You miss one piece, and suddenly, can you imagine, for example, reading a long set of books and taking out every page about a particular character? Well, the whole story would fall apart. And so being able to say to a child, okay, I understand you're having trouble. You're 14 years old. You don't understand trigonometry. Well, it probably doesn't begin at the surface with triangles and angles and what have you. I've got to go way back to fractions, decimals, percentages to know where it is that you had those gaps so that I can fill them, and then we can build from there.
So you've got to retrace the footsteps of not understanding, if you
exactly.
like, and then go to the point where the kid does understand. So because like times tables then gives you fractions, and fractions give you decimals, and then decimals gives you, and all that other stuff gives you algebra, and then you get trigonometry. So you have to go all the way back sometimes all the way back to times tables, I suppose.
You really do. And I think that a lot of people say, oh, I could never come back to mathematics. It's, I've closed that door forever. And I think part of why is because, we're trying to get onto a train that's still in motion. You've got to find a station, find a place you can connect to, and then you can get aboard.
So when you hear students say the problem with maths is it doesn't have a real-world application, what do you say to that?
There's a sense in which that's true and a sense in which it's false. The sense in which it's true is that it's a very fair criticism to say often we learn mathematics in very abstract ways. We learn all these X's and Y's and all these numbers and equations. We solve them, and what do they have to do with anything? There's that classical question of Richard goes to the shops and he buys 45 watermelons at 37 cents each, and how much change did he get from a $50 note? It's kind of, well, is that ever really something that happened? I'm sure Richard enjoys watermelon. I'm sure you like that, but
never bought that many.
Right.
Not so many that it would trouble me that way.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you wouldn't even ask that question. You'd hand over the 50 and the cashier would work out the change on a calculator. So there's a fair criticism to say it's not real world. It's not connected to a context that makes sense to me. And so in response to that, I would say, look, I am going to work really hard to be able to show you there are connections to whatever it is that you're interested in. Here we are on the radio as our voices go into the microphones that get converted into electrical signals and head out into the airwaves. There's mathematics, Fourier transforms, making all of that possible. So I've got to find the context that makes sense to you before I connect to the maths. But then the second thing I would say, the second sort of response is that that's not a fair criticism, because there are lots of things we learned which don't necessarily have to have a practical application. I was talking very briefly before about music. We have our children learn music at school. It's compulsory in primary and for a ways into secondary school. You can do lots of things with music. Music can be practical. You can sell a product. You can summon an army into war. You can stir up national pride. So music can be practical, but I don't think that's the reason that we make everyone learn music. We make them learn it so that they can appreciate this cultural expression of humanity.
It makes your head grow a little.
Absolutely.
And makes life worth living, actually, those sort of things. I often tell my kids that the thing you need maths for is to teach you to think methodically, to proceed on a linear basis. Like, if that is true, then this can be true, and then that is true, and then that is true, and then you get to the end of the problem. It teaches you problem solving, doesn't it? That's the thing.
Mathematical thinking is all about logic. And a lot of people say, I never use maths, day to day.
Yes, you do.
Anytime you want to think about, like you said, a deductive process, you want to reason through something, come to a conclusion and know that it makes sense, prove that something is the best path through a situation, you're doing mathematical thinking.
You like geometry particularly. Why?
Geometry is probably my favorite mathematical topic, even though it's hard to choose one because they're so interconnected. But I love it because of this visceral experience that every human being has when they see something. Literally, a visual appears in front of them that gives them a sort of experience of why something mathematical and logical and patterned not only makes sense, but is beautiful. As an example, in my book, one of the favorite things that I've got in there is this little feature about snowflakes. And snowflakes, there's about 1 billion snowflakes in 1 kilogram of snow. And every single one of those snowflakes is different, is unique, and yet they share this symmetry, this six-fold rotational symmetry that they all have, despite how different they are. And when you look at a snowflake under a microscope for the first time, it literally takes your breath away. I've never shown a snowflake to someone and them not just be arrested by its beauty. And so I think geometry as a part of mathematics, which, there's a reason why our visual cortex is so enormous in the human brain. It's something that speaks deeply to our souls about what the universe is about and why it makes sense.
And when you see a pile of snow, it's just like a lump of slush, isn't it? But breaking it down to individual snowflake, you see something that's structural and beautiful and symmetrical, as you say. I just was reading a story about Johannes Kepler, the great Renaissance mathematician and astronomer who sort of uncovered the secret of planetary motion, who was fascinated by a snowflake that landed on his sleeve while he was walking across the Charles Bridge in Prague. And he studied the snowflake and looked at it and wondered what its connection was to the number 6, because it's six-sided. And he looked at honeycombs in beehives and wondered why that was special. There was something beautiful about nature. So much of maths then seems to be about looking for patterns in things that aren't immediately apparent. Is that right?
The German mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss, he said that mathematics is about thinking deeply about simple things. A snowflake that lands on your sleeve, to sort of take that and investigate it. And, like you said, this six-fold symmetry, it comes from the shape of a water molecule, H2O, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. Those 2 hydrogens attach onto that oxygen atom at 120 degrees. That's the angle that they form. And if you rotate that around 3 ways, that's a hexagon that you get. And this foundational, tiny, imperceptible geometric shape gives us all of this beauty around the world.
How lovely. You're the child of Chinese, Malaysian migrants to Australia. What brought your parents to Australia? What do they want to come here, Eddie?
My parents came to Australia in the 70s, and it was really flowing out of the fact that, firstly, they themselves were the children of migrants. So my dad's parents, they were from China, and they left there it's probably in the teens, in between the 10s and the 20s.
Oh, right.
And they fled there in the midst of civil war, incredibly violent time. They left there seeking a better life and knowing that, uprooting your entire expectation and sort of all of your relationships is worth it for the sake of going somewhere where there's peace, where there is prosperity, where there is education. Schooling and education was certainly what brought my parents from Malaysia to Australia, not being of actually Malaysian ethnic descent was challenging for a variety of reasons for them.
Yeah, they've got those Bumi-Putra laws there, don't they, which favour
exactly.
Ethnic Malays over Chinese and Indian population.
It's part of the cultural decision that they've made as a nation. It sets them apart, for example, from Singapore, which is right next to them, and ethnically very similar proportions, but a whole different philosophy underneath how the society works. And so them coming to Australia was to say, look, we know that our children, my brother, my sister and I, who were all born in Australia, they're going to have access to a life that was impossible in Malaysia, particularly through education, through the employment we'd be able to gain access to. That's why they came here.
So they would have arrived as part of the first wave of Asian migrants to Australia once the White Australia policy was done away with once and for all. They must have had a rough welcome when they got here in the 70s. I've heard similar stories. Some parts of it were good, other parts not so good.
Yeah, it was patchy to say the least. Yeah. I know that, for starters, I think, you out yourself. Even though both my parents were fluent speakers of English, their accent kind of stood out, and it was sort of, you can't go anywhere and open your mouth without kind of declaring, I don't come from here, I'm a foreigner, and I've sort of brought with me all of these things which, frankly, people in Australian culture were afraid of. And there was this great amount of cynicism and fear about what does this descent of all of these, hundreds and thousands of people from another country with all their values and all of their
delicious food.
Well, yes, to be fair, they're delicious food, but I don't think there was an appreciation back then of that part of their culture. So I get why there was that apprehension. I think it's just natural human nature.
Your family would have been quite well to do in Malaysia as it was in KL back then. How was it for them to step down in terms of standard of living and social status by migrating to Australia?
Yeah, it was a big step. And it was, number one, it was financially. So they came here, my dad was very young. He was 19 years old when he landed here in Australia, and didn't have much except for the shirt on his back and a bit of support to find a place to live, get his studies and what have you. So in addition to that financial struggle, and I certainly remember growing up, we tightened our belts. We didn't have a lot growing up, but we didn't mind that. We knew we were in a wonderful and a beautiful country. But it was also all that social isolation. Classically, Eastern cultures, you have many generations within your own household.
Yeah, and uncles and aunties nearby.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That was a real gut-wrenching thing for them in terms of raising their children. It was a big hit for my mum, who entirely left her career behind because there was not this big extended family around us that would have permitted her to continue working.
Yeah, your mum had been a journalist in Malaysia. Were you aware of that growing up?
Growing up, I had no idea. She was just mum who did a big load of washing every single day for the five of us, and was absolutely a very established, skilled cook. That was who she was to me growing up. I didn't know until I was late in my teens, about my early 20s, actually, finding that out about her.
Yeah, she was a newsreader? Mm-hmm. Man, and how did she talk about it? Did she talk about that at all with you?
Not a word. She was, one of the things about her was how understated and humble she was about everything. In some ways, that made her fit in pretty well with Australian culture. She never blew her own horn about that. In fact, it wasn't even from her. It was from my dad. And then I asked her in the final years of her life about that. And she told me a few stories here and there. But it was never, she didn't feel bad that was something she left behind. It was a very deliberate and conscious sacrifice that she made for our sakes.
And how was it with you? Did you have that kind of classic migrant situation where the parents just let it be known, just quietly, that they've sacrificed an enormous amount to actually bring you to this fine country, and therefore you are expected to work incredibly hard? Did you get all that?
I think I was the youngest of three, and so by the time that I came around, it was, I deeply internalized how much of a, look, we're here, a great price has been paid for us to be here in this country. And I didn't have to have anyone tell me, you'd better work hard to use these opportunities. It was an assumption I made of myself that this is something which many people don't have the privilege of enjoying, so make the most of it.
You didn't much like primary school, did you, Eddie?
Primary school was not a fun experience for me. Honestly, I'm repressing most of my memories from when I was young because, coming off the back of this sort of latent, the phrase that got used back then was everyday, but I really dislike that phrase because it sort of makes everyday racism sound like something, it's just normal and casual. It was every day and that it happened all the time, but there was nothing casual about it. And so,
you beaten up?
Yeah, I am and was small, so it was easy to make proud of me if you were a bigger student, which every single student was. And that was kind of I look back, especially from the viewpoint now as a teacher, looking at students I've seen who, they will take this out on other students, partly as a function of their own experience of weakness. So I understand. I don't hold that against them. But it was not an enjoyable experience. And for many, many days and weeks, I would beg my mum to let me stay home from school.
The New South Wales state school system has these OC classes, opportunity classes for bright kids, and you were admitted to one of those for the final years of primary school. How, did that change things for you?
It was the first moment I guess I would have been 10 years old, where I thought to myself, oh, there are other people like me. Having this experience, firstly, of being a migrant child, the very small number of times I went back to Malaysia, I could understand Cantonese, which was the language that most of my family spoke, but I couldn't say it back. In fact, sometimes, even now, if we're in a Chinese restaurant, if I'm what I like to call the ranking Asian, I can speak the Chinese the best out of, badly, but the best out of the people who are here. When I order the dishes, the waiter or waitress will often, after I say a dish, they'll say it back to me, but with the correct intonation. I'll say, look, I already knew that I was saying it wrong, but now I know that you know that I'm saying it wrong. Thanks for establishing that.
My wife has had exactly the same experience being the ranking Asian at the table a few times. You should have to wear a hat.
Looking around, it's like, okay, it's me, I'm ordering.
Or a conch shell or something like that.
Right, exactly. It's like, well, it's my turn to speak. So I knew when I was back in Malaysia I didn't belong. In Australia, I didn't belong. But when in this opportunity class, I was surrounded by people who loved learning, I thought, I've sort of found my people. And that was wonderful.
Tell me how your family was brought into the life of the local church in your area.
It started off in a fairly innocuous way. I think my dad brought us along. I think he thought, Australia, broadly speaking, has this, Christian background to it. They pray in Parliament. It's sort of the values that started Australia as a nation. And he also had some friends who had their same Southeast Asian background. It's like, well, let's come together. Sort of there was that social aspect to it. And growing up, I went to Sunday school. But it was really probably my brother, actually. So my brother is 8 years older than me. And Kevin, I viewed really as such a mentor. I had a very close relation. I always have had a very close relationship with him, but especially growing up, I looked up to him. He'd never told me anything that was untrue before. And he laid out, here's what the gospel is. Here's how it all works. Here's what the Bible means. And I thought, well, that makes sense of life. And so probably from age 7 is when that kind of became part of my identity and our identity as a family.
So you went to a selective high school. That would have been a good fit for you as well. Was it more competitive though, Eddie, once you were there?
It was certainly more competitive. I remember, that sense of being first from, okay, I'm one of the smart kids, and then becoming a small fish in a very large pond. And I still recall looking at some of my peers who I didn't know at the time and, somewhat looking down my nose and thinking, I'm smarter than a whole bunch of these kids, and rapidly being humbled and having to come to terms with the fact that, I'm distinctly average in this place. I didn't feel, my identity didn't come from I'm the top ranking kid, so it shook me up a little bit, but I was like, okay, cool.
Did you feel you failed at being a nerd? Did you?
I definitely got a sense that, all right, here I am. I found my place in the nerd pecking order, which was lower down than I had thought of before. But no, I just adored being around such smart, thoughtful people. I really found a lot of friends there.
What did you get from doing drama? Were you introverted, and did you find drama to be a way of dealing with that?
I was and remain heavily introverted. It's tricky as a teacher because when you are in the classroom, a huge part of your job is to develop relationships, lots of them, very fast as well. And then, of course, standing up in front of a large group of people, communicating to them verbally, visually, all the rest. So you develop a whole bunch of traditionally extroverted skills. But drama back at school, I started it in year 9, took it all the way through to my HSC, the end of year 12. Those 4 years of drama were hugely formative for me, and they're skills I use every single day.
How did you decide on becoming a teacher then?
I think it was from my experience first of loving learning and loving to see other people learn. I actually, in the first place, didn't want to become a teacher. I think as probably a 6 or 7 year old, wanted to become a firefighter, then discovered that having chronic asthma is not a good thing to have as a firefighter.
And then you wanted to be a dinosaur.
That's right. I went through those classics.
Right, yeah.
But I sort of, for the longest time, did actually want to go into IT. My brother was studied computer science, and then the dot-com crash happened, and that made me reinvestigate. And I thought, I love learning. I love helping other people learn. If I could have the opportunity to do that for my life, for my career, that'd be a pretty good gig.
You say you like to see people learning. See, does that look like something? What is that? Any facial expression? What does that look like?
It is. I mean, well, it's that look in someone's eyes when they suddenly have this realization, this epiphany. They're like, oh, it all makes sense. It all clicks. I've gone from that place where I'm trying to do mental gymnastics and suddenly it all coalesces in your brain. It's a pretty wonderful thing to observe.
And does that happen collectively? Does the whole classroom go, oh, like that? Or does it like pop, 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 pop?
There's both. There's both. And sometimes there's a sound to it. Sometimes I'll hear people draw breath or they'll say the, oh. And hearing that is immensely satisfying for me.
Is that relief as well, that sound? That sounds like, oh, thank God I get it.
There is that, but there's a sense of wonder. I think mathematics is full of things that explain the experiences we see around us all the time, but don't have a reason for why, like why rainbows are, or why snowflakes have that symmetry. It's something I never tire of explaining.
On ABC Radio, you're listening to Conversations with Richard Feidler. Podcast, broadcast, online.
What did your parents think when you said you wanted to be a teacher, Eddie?
I think at first they didn't say anything because they were speechless. It really came out of left field for them. I think for a long time they saw me growing up, watching my brother, like I said, sort of fitting into that IT geek sort of niche pretty happily. And I think they were surprised because I guess, and this is one of my joys as a teacher, I often get to see an aspect of a student, a child, more so and more deeply and more transparently than even their own family does. And so my parents didn't see me at school as an army cadet helping a younger student, a recruit, learn how to pitch a tent or navigate through the hills. They didn't see me as a peer support leader, as a Year 11 kid, helping the Year 7s make friends, navigate their way around the school. These are really foundation for my joy in helping others learn. And so I think they were quite surprised and taken aback.
How old were you when your mum got seriously ill, Eddie?
I was in Year 10. I can't remember now which part of the year it was in. So I was either 15 or 16 years old. And it just took us all completely by surprise. My mum always was a very healthy sort of person, didn't smoke, was fit, cooked really healthy food. So it was kind of like, where did this come from?
Was it a terminal prognosis right from the start?
So she was given a number of months, so it's 6, 7, 8 months to live. And this was back in 2001 when, I mean, we'd come a long way, but certainly back then as compared to now, cancer was just kind of, it was a big word. You heard the word cancer and you thought, whoa, this has just changed and redefined everything about our lives. She was a fighter.
And this was lung cancer, and she'd not been a smoker at all.
And it's actually still not that well known that there's many forms of lung cancer that will affect people who have never taken a cigarette in their life.
How long did she hang on for?
It was 3 years by the end, and that was grueling. I mean, she really wanted to hold on. She held on long enough to see me finish high school, to see my sister get married. But by the end, even though, watching her life sort of vanish away was gut-wrenching, but it was almost also, I mean, my primary emotional memory of that time, particularly I remember my dad was actually with my mum in palliative care, and he was staying there overnight, and the doctors had told him, you should hang around at this time, don't go home. My brother and sister and I were at home, and it was early in the morning, it was still dark, when my dad called our home, gave us the news, and we just kind of stood there, the three of us, in this fluorescent light of the kitchen with the dark outside. And just the peak sort of emotion was really relief. She'd been through so much at that point, and just to know her suffering had ended, that was kind of this big, after 3 years, we were glad to be able to say she's in a better place.
I can't imagine what that's like to hear that when you're in year 10. It must have been like the floor falling away from you to some degree. You must have felt like you needed to hang on to something for dear life.
It was a strange experience for me as a year 10 student, not having had any friends, again, being here in Australia, not having that extended family, and so therefore perhaps an auntie and uncle or a cousin or something like that had gone through this. So it was very new, but in some ways, for me at least, it came at a time in my life where, you're an adolescent, you're trying to find your own identity, and you're trying to do that through, your peer networks at school and what you enjoy doing. And it sort of came to me because my mum was very insistent. She didn't want anyone, apart from the bare necessities, she didn't want anyone at school to know.
Why?
I think there was this sense of, number one, she didn't want my brother, sister and I to be that kid whose mum has cancer. I think she viewed this stigma around it, that she didn't want, and she didn't want to rely on other people. She didn't want to put the burden of care onto other people. And she was also a very private person, and so not a single one of my friends.
What about teachers? Did school know what you were going through?
A small number of my teachers knew, so the principal, the deputy, the head of welfare, and I really leaned hard on those teachers because, I would sometimes turn up to school and I'd just be ragged, bags under my eyes, because my mum's lung cancer, as she gradually lost lung function, she eventually got to the point where she was 24/7 on an oxygen tank, and in the middle of the night, if she needed her oxygen tank changed, my brother was working, my sister was going through her dentistry degree. Really, I was the best suited person to do that. So I'd turn up at school the next day having had very little sleep, and I'd just crash. I would just sleep in the sick bay for hours, or even fall asleep in class. And to know that they understood that. My friends didn't. They just thought I was bored with class, I guess. But school supported me through that in the best way that they could.
Tell me what your year advisor told you, because I'm guessing your school marks went through the floor to some degree there. And what kind of advice did you get?
Yeah, my teachers did a great job, as best as they could anyway in the circumstances, supporting me, not just by giving me the structures and providing me time and all that, but that emotional support. So my year advisor, still a friend actually, because sometimes I go back to my old school and say hi, Mr. Flood. He looked after us all the way through the 6 years, and I still remember in my HSC year, this is the time, year 12, things count now. Every single exam that you do, every assignment that you hand in, it matters. And I still remember there's this one task I had to do. I had to make a mask. So in drama, we had to craft a mask for ourselves and color it in all these layers. And it was terrible. I don't think I even got 1 out of 10. And I just kind of was gutted by how I just saw my education going down the drain. And I knew, like I said, from an early age, that education was why my parents had come to Australia in the first place. And I remember Mr. Flood saying to me, after one of these moments where an exam or an assignment had just gone terribly, he said, "Look, Eddie, it's hard for you to accept and believe what I'm about to tell you. But I want you to just take what I'm about to say and put it in your back pocket and remember it," which I still do. He said, "Look, I've been teaching for a long time. And, every kid is different. Every student I've ever encountered has a different personality, different background. But I've met kids like you, Eddie, and I know enough about you. I've seen your character and your personality and the way you've approached your life and your studies and what's happening in your family right now. And I want to tell you now, I can assure you, whatever it is you're going to do in life, you're going to be successful, you're going to make a difference, you're going to do something important in the world. And I know it doesn't look like it. I know it looks like your final exams are going to go, terribly, but I can see enough about who you are as a person on the inside that these circumstances, they're going to fall off of you one day, and you've got to have that faith that this is going to come good. There's light at the end of the tunnel."
So you did remember that, and obviously you're telling it to me now. It's something you really did internalise that thought. Do you give similar speeches to other kids going through hard times now?
It's actually one of the main reasons I remember that conversation so clearly is because I have now rehearsed versions of that conversation with so many students. And looking at a student, in tears, just emotionally deflated. Something's happened to them either within school or within their home. And when you're young, you don't have the benefit of this perspective. I mean, I cross the road and I say to my kids, hold my hand when we're crossing the road, because you don't have the peripheral vision to see these cars that might hit you as we're going across this zebra crossing. Hold on to me because I can see something you can't. I can see something about you that you yourself can't see. And so it's in having the privilege of talking to students over and over again and having the opportunity to assure them and say, you're on a trajectory. There's a part of you that is not defined by your circumstances. And actually, these circumstances, if anything, they're going to make you stronger. And I don't want you to lose hope. I don't want you to give up.
That's a lovely thing to say to kids. What you were going through at the time seems horribly unfair. I don't know if unfair is the right word for it, Eddie, but it's awful. It was awful for you as a kid. Now, your church has a lot to say about suffering. Did you think about that a lot? Did you talk about that a lot in your church?
Yeah.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, we did. I mean, I'd probably say it was that bedrock of knowing from the Bible as a Christian that one of the most important things in what Christians believe is that God is sovereign. He has control. Things don't happen by accident. And so even though from one angle you might say, well, there are terrible things happening. God, why are you doing this to me? At the same time, I know just from the distance from me to my kids, I will frequently put my children through things they do not want to do. I will hold them down as they fight and kick as a doctor or a nurse punctures their skin with a needle and immunizes them from all these diseases. And I'll say, you don't want this, but this is what you need. And to know that if that's the way I regard my children, if God is so much wiser than I am compared to me, to my children, I know that what I'm going through, if it's my mom being torn away from me, or these experiences of being younger and being treated in these harsh and cruel ways, those things shaped me and formed me, and they've made me who I am today.
I said right at the start that you weren't going to be a maths teacher. You were going to be an English and history teacher. So why did you change your mind?
I know, in a sense, it might look like it's left and right, like a watershed moment, almost heading in opposite directions. But for me, the reason I became a teacher in the first place was really about this wonderful opportunity you can have to interface with a child's life. In fact, I said before that as a teacher, I often get to see children in a light that their own parents don't even get to see. And over the years, 6 years you get with a child, you might not be their teacher every year, but you have this ongoing relationship with them and this ability to influence and shape and launch off this child into the world and equip them with the skills and the disposition and the outlook on life to make a positive difference in the world. That's something you can do from every subject. In fact, every subject does it in its own way, equips children with skills and perspectives that they can use to make the world better.
Right, so it says the maths is a big deal, but it's really the teaching. It's the teaching. That's the fundamental
and the child you get to interact with. So literally, if you said to me as I left here, Eddie, you know what, the department's just made a decision, you're going to have to be an art teacher. I probably would not be a very good art teacher. I couldn't paint my way out of a paper bag.
But you'd have a red hot go, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely, because I know the visual arts, every different thing that we have our children learn, equips them and makes them better, and that's a wonderful privilege.
So why maths then? How were you persuaded to go into maths?
The particular thing that drew me into mathematics was really about need. I saw going out into university that there weren't enough mathematics teachers. There still aren't. So this is more than 15 years ago that this trend existed in New South Wales, across Australia, the Western world, really. We don't have enough mathematics teachers because if you're any good at mathematics, you could become an engineer or an actuary, go into finance, earn a lot more money, have better status in society. And so mathematics education has always struggled to have the right people in there. And I thought, look, if this is where the area of need is, if this is where society has a gap that needs to be filled, and if I can do something to contribute to that, actually, that made a lot of sense to me.
Do you know, I don't think I was even aware this was a problem, that there's a shortage of skilled maths teachers at the moment.
I didn't know when I was at school either, because all of the teachers whom I had, particularly in a lovely, well-served metropolitan area of Sydney, you're going to have lots to grab from, lots of trained maths teachers who have a degree. But then as you go into other areas that are harder to staff, particularly as you go into rural, regional, remote, for every school like the one I went to, where all the teachers were maths trained, you've got a school where there's no maths trained teachers. We've got people who are out of field. They're doing the very best they can. We're very grateful for them, but they don't have nearly the support they need. And so it was something I only discovered when I got to university.
Once you were a student teacher, did the kids smell your fear? I can remember student teachers really well. We could smell the fear coming off most of them when they'd walk into the classroom.
Without a doubt. I still remember back to when I was a student teacher, and I was a nervous wreck during those, I'd have a 3-week and then a 5-week placement. And I remember coming back to uni, sitting in, a lecture hall or a tutorial space and thinking, oh, thank God I'm not responsible for what's about to happen for the next hour. I don't have to have a lesson plan that could go well or disastrously. I definitely, early on, took a while to find my feet, my sort of persona as a teacher. You had to learn all these skills that didn't come naturally, like how to be angry. I mean, anger comes naturally to some teachers, but didn't come naturally to me.
Well, in my day, young man, it used to be the teacher would simply be angry by pinging a little bit of chalk at your head and go,
That's right.
I've had a gutful of you, Fardler. That's right. Great days.
That was a very good first-hand impression,
Yeah,
I can tell you.
In the head with a piece of chalk.
I still remember a woman who I met out in the Riverina. She must have been 75 or 80 years old, and she said, when we got asked to do a maths problem, we would be instructed to write the answer to that problem on our hand. Then the teacher, after a few minutes, would say, hold up your answers so I can see them on your hands. And then that teacher would go to the front of the room. She would open the drawer out of her desk and she would pull out her cane. And any student who had the wrong answer written on their hands, they never forgot for the rest of their lives, as this woman didn't. Thankfully, we don't do that anymore.
No, that's a bad thing, isn't it?
That's a bad thing. But you have to have other ways to earn the respect of you, especially in high school.
So how do you do that? Do you simmer? Do you raise your voice, or do you go quiet?
You've got to have the whole set of tools in your toolbox. One of the things which I realized as a teacher, you're trying to explain an idea, a concept, a skill, and it doesn't cut it to know it well enough to answer those questions in the textbook. And then you go into the room and then you just tell the kids what you know. One way is not enough. You need 15 different ways to approach an idea. And it's the same with classroom, student discipline, knowing what it is. Every kid brings their own cultural and family baggage. And I remember one of my old supervisors, he said 99% of the problems you have in your classroom, they started outside your classroom. So you've got to know the kids, know what they're going through and give them what's appropriate to them.
Oh, that's psychology then.
Absolutely.
Right. So you say you have to have a number of different approaches, way of answering the same question. That's the key there, multiple approaches.
When I start a school year, the average Australian high school teacher has 5 classes. So that's 30 kids each, 150 kids. And you know what? Of those 150, maybe 10 of them really will learn exactly the way you like to learn, Mr. Feidler. It's like, oh, that made perfect sense the first time. Then there's the other 140, and they need another way. And they have different questions that you never asked as a kid, but you've got to anticipate those misconceptions so you can help them.
Is the way you present yourself important? Like watching your videos, you do look like a grown-up high school kid in a way. You dress like you wear you wear a kind of a shirt with a tie and sort of grey pants and all that. You do look. Is that a way of relating to them to make them go, oh, I'm not that different from you?
Look, it's kind of funny. That's a really fine line you have to walk. For example, I have this beautiful red tie that I was given as a gift many years ago, which I am never allowed to wear at school with a white shirt because a white shirt with a red tie is the boys' uniform in senior school. So it's kind of like, that's off limits. Someone's going to say, hey, young man, you're out of class. Have you got a pass to go to the toilet? So I have to be careful with how I ride that line. And it was only a couple of years ago, actually, the first time where I was at the Year 12 formal with my students, and I left and the security didn't card me. They didn't say, hey, kids aren't allowed to leave yet. That was only a couple of years ago the first time that happened. But you do have to have that sense of immediacy that you understand the kids. You're not their buddy. You're not their friend. Don't try to be cool. That's the wrong idea.
Yeah.
Don't floss or do a dance move in front of your kids. But you have to be able to understand them.
When you started your YouTube channel, WooTube, you were making literally a video for one student. You now have nearly 700,000 subscribers, but it was just one student to begin with. What can you tell me about that student's circumstances?
I mean, this student, as you mentioned before, he was ill. So he was diagnosed with cancer. And it's kind of standard issue to just say, here's a textbook, you know, when you are away from school for the weeks of your radiotherapy, chemotherapy, here's the chapter you need to do, keep up with that, and then when you return, we'll be up to here and you can pick up where you left off.
Oh, it's asking a lot of the kid, isn't it?
Oh, it's asking a huge amount. And I remembered, you know, and this is part of why, again, my mum didn't want anyone to know that she was ill. Part of the thing that I think she was trying to avoid was being treated as different, being, you know, having all of the teachers and your friends look at you differently. And I knew this boy, part of what's troubling about having your life uprooted and going into this treatment is your life gets defined by this. You don't get to do all those things that you enjoyed before. So I wanted him he enjoyed maths. He loved learning with us in class, and I wanted him to have access to that normal life he'd always had, and this was part of how I did it.
And how did you become aware it had become a thing? Like these video lessons were being shared by lots of kids within the school and then beyond the school?
Yeah, it was a couple of times. So I think one of the memories I had was at my previous school, when I started doing these videos, I was the touch football coach. So I'd often take my team out on a bus. We'd go to another school or a public oval, and then the other school's team, we'd meet them, then we'd play a game for an hour, and then we'd get back on the bus. And I remember one time we got off the bus, and this team of girls who I was like, oh, that's the right uniform, we're playing against this team. And they looked over at us, which is normal. They're like, oh, there's the team we're playing. But then suddenly, a few of the players on the team, they kind of nudged each other and they sort of whispered and they were sort of looking at me funny, and I thought, what's this about? And when I got closer, they were like, oh my gosh, are you Eddie Wu? And it's never just Eddie or Mr. It's always the full name. It's like, are you Eddie Wu? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, you're that maths teacher on YouTube. And I'm like, yes. I'm like, how do you even know about that? And so I think that was probably the first moment that I realized this has gone way beyond what I originally intended. And even now, like I'll be in an international airport. I was in Dubai airport on the way back from Uganda, or I was in Taiwan, and it's kind of people recognize me. And look, I'm pretty, you know, transparent about this. Asian, thin face, glasses. I have a pretty common face. I'm like, are you thinking I'm someone else? But no, they're like, I've seen your videos on YouTube. We'll take a selfie. It's lovely. It's very common.
That is lovely. That's absolutely delightful. So then suddenly the mass audience found it. Do you run ads on your YouTube channel?
I don't run ads.
Why not? Because you'd make a lot of money if you did. You'd make a real lot of money.
Well, I disabled them for a couple of reasons. So the first one is, firstly, as distinct to other people on YouTube who it's their business, I have a job. I'm a teacher. I'm still in the classroom. It's the thing that I love most. I have a salary from the New South Wales Department of Education. So I don't need, revenue from there to function. But the other thing is, I'm thinking, okay, you're a 14-year-old kid and you have your phone and you can look up anything you like on YouTube. You could look up cat videos. You could watch Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. You could be watching music video, whatever. And instead, you choose voluntarily to watch videos about maths. The last thing I want to do is say, I'm going to put an ad in front of you, wait 5 seconds before you skip this. I want to say, good on you for taking the initiative to learn this yourself. I want to say thumbs up.
So you won't thrust a Trivago ad in front of someone. Instead, you want to pull out a chair and invite them to sit down.
100%.
That's extremely public-spirited of you to do that, and what a marvellous thing it is. And you've been made a local hero in the Australia Day Awards in 2018 as a result of all this. You were saying there, in talking about the shortage of maths teachers, and I'm not expecting huge disagreement from you on this. It seems to me that if you paid teachers more, if we paid teachers and more and valued the work they do, maybe even asked more of them for that money that's being paid of them too, then a whole lot of those people who are being attracted into engineering and IT and other industries might find themselves much happier as teachers and might come flooding back into teaching maths. And then we might get that kind of result we're actually looking for down the track, which is a more maths literate population.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm not, it's not about lining people's wallets. There's this guy named Dan Pink who's done all this research into what motivates people in jobs. If you want to get people into a certain career, do you pay them more? And the answer is yes, to a certain point. When people are engaged in a creative pursuit, and teaching is a very creative industry, it's not that you pay them more and you get better results. You pay them until the point that they don't need to worry about their income and their money. And then once they don't have to worry about it, they can focus on their job. They can think, I'm not getting second best because I'm choosing this career. I live in Sydney. On a teacher's salary alone, if it's a single income family, you can afford a pretty decent cardboard box, but it is a cardboard box nonetheless. And you've got lots of teachers who, out of their own pockets, are buying things for their own classes, for their students. Every year we'll have a bunch of kids in our school who can't afford a calculator, which they need. It's essential. Not that it's that expensive, but they don't have the disposable income for it.
Well, teachers are putting their hands in their own pockets to pay for this stuff.
All the time. And so what you want is to say for schools and for individual teachers that we have the resources to allow you to, in an unfettered way, concentrate on doing your job best and caring for these kids.
Is it worse in rural areas?
In rural areas, the main challenge is that it's hard to have teachers out there who have the right qualifications and who'll stay. It's fairly common for teachers to go out there for maybe 2 or 3 years, but then they leave. And that's kind of fatal, because teaching is so much about relationships. It takes those 3, 4, 5 years to become part of the community, know the kids, their parents, and that investment is difficult to ask of someone who's come from a city, a metro area, suburban area, and to move out there, relocated their life. So those areas are really difficult to staff, and they're doing it tough.
You're a real advocate for public education. Have you ever been tempted to go into the private school system, which would pay you, I assume, more money than you get now?
Yeah, significantly more. I've been, kindly invited, offered positions here and there. But for me, even though I think that the work that gets done in any school, private or public, is wonderfully important and worthwhile. For me, number one, I always went through public schools, and I view it as a public good. Education, even if I didn't have children of my own, it is a wonderful thing to live in a society where we value the education of our young people so much that we say, you know what? We don't want you to pay for this. This is something that we want you to have, that we're going to say it's illegal not to send your children to school because it serves everyone. All society and culture benefits. And it's something I love being a public educator, saying, you know what, in this classroom, not a single one of you pays for the education you're getting. In fact, the only person in this room that pays is me because I'm a taxpayer, but it's worth it for the benefit you get as an individual and that society gets as a whole.
What a wonderful thing, Eddie, and what a pleasure it is to speak with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Richard. Thanks.
abc.net.au/conversations is our website. I'm Richard Feidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Feidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.